right, chapter 3. We're going to notice the first 12 verses here. We're going to kind of put that together. Proverbs. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel, and marrow to thy bones. Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the firstfruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. Now we see a lot of things in this first passage that is a theme throughout the Bible. And we notice that. We see this first statement that he says, my son. This shows instruction to follow as a father's concern, and it reflects God's love for humanity. How many parents want to give proper instruction to their children? That's a goal, right? We rear up our children in the natural process of events. In the natural process of rearing children and having children, parents want to give proper instruction. When we look in Romans chapter 1, and you have this whole list of sins that Paul is talking about, that the Gentiles, he's listing these sins that the Gentiles have committed. And the whole point of the book of Romans is, how do we stand justified in the sight of God? The same sin that is going to condemn the Gentile to hell is going to condemn the Jew to hell. The same gospel that will save the Jew is what will save the Gentile. And if you notice, there is a sin listed among all of these terrible sins that is called without natural affection. Now, what is that without natural affection? That is the affection that, well, first of all, that a parent has for a child. That's natural affection. That a child has for a parent. Now, are there people in the world that do not possess natural affection? Sure there are. And so when we come into Proverbs chapter 3 and we say, my son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. He's doing this based on the fact he wants his son to have what? He wants length of days, long life, and peace, because they'll be added to you. Now, is it a guarantee that the person who keeps the law of God, he's going to live long days, he's going to have an unnaturally long life? Is that what he's indicating here? Generally speaking, the person who keeps the law of God, who behaves in such a way that he becomes wise in the ways of God, how's that man or woman going to live? Is he or she going to live in such a way that he or she's carousing and living a dangerous lifestyle? That's what we're getting at, isn't it? They're not going to live in such a way that they're living dangerous lifestyles, which will shorten your life, generally speaking. Are there people who live in such ways that they drink alcohol, they do drugs, they live in such a way that it puts their lives in jeopardy, that, man, they live, you think, how are they still alive in this world? Well, sure. Sure, there are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, the person who lives and gains wisdom, godly wisdom, they will live in such a way that their lives will be lengthened, and they will have peace Why would they have peace? They're not fighting with the people of the world. They're not fighting with the civil authorities. They're not fighting amongst themselves. They're not living in such a way as to have those things happening in their lives. Now, it says, let thine heart keep my commandments. Again, we talked a little bit about this last time. The heart here is the spiritual heart, the biblical heart. We're not talking about the blood pump. We're talking about the seat of emotion. We're talking about the intellect, the will, the conscience. Okay? I think in your notes, I have in here 1 Samuel 8, verse 7. The heart is the place where we first leave God, isn't it? That's why Jesus said, where is it the person first commits adultery? In the heart. That's where we first begin to consider it, isn't it? That's where any sin we commit, we first must think about it and consider it. So we must consider that. Let thine heart keep my commandments. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart. This is a figurative statement. Bind them about thy neck. You know, I think Brother Ron brought this up in his geography class, I think maybe last week. The Pharisees of the New Testament wore phylacteries. They would bind them around their heads. The law, they would put a portion of the law in little boxes around their heads. Look, they were taking a figurative statement that Moses said and being ridiculous with it. What Moses meant was, listen, teach your children the law in the evening and in the morning. Teach it to them regularly. Write the law upon the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. What did Jeremiah say about humanity guiding itself? Oh Lord, it is not in man to direct his own steps. Why is that? Because men are foolish. People are foolish. Jesus called us sheep. Have you ever done any kind of research or study on sheep? I did a sermon on sheep one time. A shepherd looks at Psalm 23. Poor old sheep. You talk about the dumb of the dumb. They'll drink out of a muddy mud hole when there's fresh water running right beside him. There's a reason Jesus called us sheep, because we must be guided. We must be helped at all costs. They will walk right up, they will eat grass and follow grass and eat and eat and eat until they just fall right over a cliff. They won't even look around themselves. They'll eat, when you read Psalm 23, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. They would have to go out to the pasture and make sure there were no poisonous plants growing, because an old dumb sheep will just eat whatever's there, because sheep are dumb. Well, that kind of names us, doesn't it? In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. Verse 7 is a perfect example of parallelism. Be not wise in thine own eyes, and fear the Lord. That's the same as and depart from evil. Okay? He's trying to ensure that he is imparting this wisdom upon his son, because he wants his son to be able to grow up and have a full life and to be able to have what's good in this world. And there's only one way to have what's good in this world. Okay? Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. See, now in the Old Testament, they would offer the first fruits of the harvest. If they offered the first fruits of the harvest, then that would ensure they would receive a good harvest. They would offer the wave harvest. They would offer the heave harvest, or the heave offering, the wave offering, and God expects the first fruits. He still expects the first fruits, okay, of our offering. Now we don't offer the same types of sacrificial offerings that they offered under the old law, okay? But there's an application here. He still expects the first fruits. Does He want us to sit down and say, okay, I have to pay all this, and then after I pay everything I owe in this world, I'll give God what's left over? And if that happens to be, $3 or $4, that's okay. And here's something else He doesn't expect. He doesn't expect when the plate starts passing around for me to grab out my billfold and start considering what kind of dollars I have in it. He expects me to have already considered what my offering is, because He wants the first fruits. And if He's going to gain the first fruits, I have to have already considered that. I consider what I give Him. He gets the first fruits. So how much is that? How much do I give God? Well, He didn't give us a number, did He?
Oh, you can.
He told us to consider that. So I have to consider, and that's what I have to consider. I have to sit down and look at what He's blessed me with, and then I have to consider that. It's tougher now to do it than it was then. It was easier then. Okay, yeah, He's given me a number, and I go right down the line, and listen, they gave a lot more than 10%, I'll tell you that. That was the additional, wasn't it? That was the additional. Because they gave a 10% of, really, if you want to get down, Brother Jim, what was it? By the time they got through 10% and then figuring this and figuring that, it was a lot closer, about 50%, wasn't it? And so they gave a huge amount of what their possessions were. And so we have to consider that. Now verse number 11 is 11 and 12 is something we need to consider. It says, "My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of His correction. For whom the Lord loveth, He correcteth, even as a father the son in whom He delighteth." Now that's been carried over to the New Testament. We read that, don't we? The writer of Hebrews had something to say about that. And Hebrews 12, I think, Hebrews 12 verse 5. Okay, I think verse 5. Maybe might add verse 6 in there too. Thank you. And so what does it mean? Now when we're young and our parents have to take us and do a little correcting, a little adjustment of the attitude, how much do we appreciate that? Well, we don't appreciate it very much. Yeah, I didn't. My daddy didn't have to do a whole lot of that to me, because the first couple he did left a great impression upon me. And it was a good while till he got that third and last one in on me. And by the way, I was 18 when that last one came along. And but they don't do it because they enjoy it. Have you ever heard, has a parent ever told you, well, this is going to hurt me much worse than it's going to hurt you? Yeah, that's not really true. That's not really true. It does hurt their feelings. It does hurt their feelings. I'll tell you that much. It always hurt my feelings if I had to spank a child of mine. It really did. It was the worst possible scenario to me. I still think about that sometimes, my children when they were little and me having to spank one of them. It's tragic. They probably don't even remember it. I do. I remember every single one of them. And it's almost like you can't get it out of your mind. But why do we do that? Why do we do it? Exactly. And he tells us right here in verse 12, doesn't he? For correction. Even as a father, the son in whom he delighteth, the son in whom he loves, he will correct. You know, I think maybe we all grew up with that kid or two that we went to school with that just kind of, you know, we watched them grow up and we were like, boy, I wish my parents would kind of let me do some of that stuff. Or they got to kind of just do whatever they wanted to, and you think, boy, I wish I could do some of that. And now we look back on it, and if those kids are still alive, they're probably in jail. And we're not, because our parents trained us not to go to jail. Now, does that mean because our parents corrected us in young life, does that mean that every time a child's not going to grow up to be disobedient? Well, that's not what it means. But generally speaking, that is what that means. There's always an exception to the rule. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. What does that tell us about wisdom and understanding? It does go hand in hand. Just because well, I'm thinking more of knowledge. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. But wisdom and understanding are very similar, okay? In fact, they're almost identical. But notice that if you want wisdom and you want understanding, it doesn't just happen. Happy is the man that finds understanding. Understanding is not, or wisdom. Wisdom's not just going to fall out of the sky and knock you in the head. Okay? If you want understanding, you have to get it. You have to do something, okay? You have to gain it. You have to search it. You have to, first of all, if you want to find something, what do you first of all have to want and have to have? You have to want to find it. You have to have a desire for it. And you have to want to go out and gain it and to get it. Okay? So, a parent wants to train a child. Did Solomon want to train Rehoboam? And I think this is who Solomon's talking to in a lot of these parables. Did Solomon definitely wanted to train Rehoboam? What was the problem? We look back over the history, and if you've been in Jim's class on the divided kingdom, what did we learn about Rehoboam?
He did what he said he did.
He did do what he said he did, which he did not listen to his daddy, did he? Have you ever wondered why he didn't listen to his daddy? Bingo. His daddy was driving in these instructions. Okay? He was almost as if he was pleading with him, wasn't he? Listen to me, son. I'm telling you from experience. Rehoboam could not get past the example. Isn't that heartbreaking?
But also, when did you start teaching him? Did you try to teach him from a young age, or did you get to a middle age and Solomon finally went, crap, that's going to be a terrible kid?
Well, here's the thing. Proverbs was probably written when Solomon was at his spiritual height as a younger man. Ecclesiastes was probably written in his older years when he came back to his senses. Okay? But what was the deal with Rehoboam? When did he become king? After he had gone through all of watching his daddy. Rehoboam could not overcome the example that his daddy was not. He was not the example that he should have been. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines who pulled him away from being the person that he was when he was a younger man. David and Nathan trained Solomon to be who he should have been. And then he brought these 1,000 women in, and they pulled him away. And that's what happened. When you bring a bunch of ungodly trash into the palace, what do you expect to happen? It starts smelling like a dump. And so Rehoboam could not overcome that. Any comments or questions? He's talking about wisdom. Verse 21, my son, let not them depart from thine eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. What is discretion, by the way? Having discretion is the ability to control oneself. Rehoboam certainly didn't have that. Then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. When thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. You know, when you go to sleep at night and you have all these problems in the world, and you've made all these poor choices, what kind of sleep do you have? Well, you're in for it, aren't you? Things are not going to go very well for you. And Solomon was trying to get across to his son here that there are certain benefits to be gained from keeping wisdom. Okay? It's a shame that most of us can't go back and be a younger man or a younger woman again after we've gained our wisdom. You know, wisdom, wouldn't it be great to be 18 or 20 or 30 even, and be as wise as you are when you're 60 or 50? It'd be wonderful. But to gain wisdom, you have to have knowledge, and then wisdom is the proper application of knowledge. Understanding is the proper application. And there was a fellow told me one time that we were talking about a certain thing, and he said, I can't necessarily tell you what to do, but I can sure tell you what not to do. That's kind of this parallelism that we're talking about in Hebrew literature. And I thought to myself, boy, that's coming from a man who bears the years of making poor decisions. And I was a young man when he told me that. And, but there are certain benefits gained from keeping wisdom. What do you have? You have life to the soul. You have grace as an ornament to the neck, Solomon says. Assistance and protection along life's way. Confidence and peace. You can get that good night's sleep, right? Having touched on fear, the wise king insisted that the wise are not to be afraid of the punishment which will surely come upon the wicked. If you're wise and you've lived in a wise way, and you've allowed wisdom to teach you or guide you along the way, is there a need to be afraid of the punishment that comes upon the wicked? There's no need to fear that. Okay? You don't have to fear that. Are the godly to fear the punishment of the wicked? Is the godly to fear death? We shouldn't fear death. The godly has no reason to fear death. And so we need to be able to learn and to strive and to be what God needs us to be. When we look in verses 27 through the end of the chapter, what Solomon has provided here are the ways that we're to interact with our fellow man. And he talks about not withholding any good thing from from them to whom it is due. When it is in the power of thine hand to do it. Now, verse 28 is connected that say not unto thy neighbor, go and come again, and tomorrow I will give it to thee when thou hast it by thee. Okay? Devise not evil against thy neighbor, seeing he dwelleth securely by thee. Now, what's he talking about in those three verses? Every time someone comes up and says, hey, I need something, are we obligated in some way to provide that? Or do we need to understand helping someone in the sense of what Paul said in Galatians chapter 6, when we therefore have opportunity to do good unto all people, especially those of the household of faith? I think what we're talking about in this passage, I think what Solomon is talking about here is, this could be a very difficult to understand, particularly verse 27, but I think he's referring to owing a debt. If you owe a debt to someone and they come up and they say, look, you owe a debt, pay the debt when it's due. That's what he's talking about. Withhold not good thing from them to whom it is due when it is in your power to give it. If you have it and you owe it to someone, don't say, oh, well, come back tomorrow and I'll pay it to you. And then you hide out. Have you ever noticed that some people who, they can find you when it comes time to borrow money, but then when it comes time to pay it back, boy, they're like this disappear. You can't find them, they can't find you, they forgot who you are. It's just, they're the best magician in the world. So I think what he's talking about here is owing a debt. Okay? Strive not with a man without cause, if he have done thee no harm. Get along with all people if it's in you, if you have the ability. Is it possible to get along with all people? Some people don't want to get along with other people. There are some people, believe it or not, that are in the world that refuse to get along with other people. They don't even like themselves, let alone godly people. So, what's the best way to handle people like that? Now, this word strive, it very likely could be a legal term, though. Okay, so we might be talking about lawsuits here. Don't engage in frivolous lawsuits. But what's the best way to handle people who are not capable of getting along with others? Stay away from them. Stay away from people who it is impossible to get along with. We do not have to be around everybody all of the time. Okay? Verses 31 and 32, envy is forbidden. The wise will not follow it. Okay? We're not going to live that way. We're not going to behave in that manner. Okay? God doesn't expect that. God brings curses upon the wicked and blessings upon the just, and the wise will inherit glory. We want to be wise and we want to behave in a wise manner. Okay? We come into chapter 4 here. He says, hear ye children the instruction of a father, and attend to know understanding. Again, now we come here, and in verse 4, right immediately, he kind of changes. Now, he's been talking to his son. Now we're talking to children. I don't know here. He may be talking to his other children. This might be like a classroom setting, though. This could be that. Attend to this knowledge and no understanding. He says here at verse 2, for I give you good doctrine. What is doctrine? Instruction. It's teaching. It's good. It's wholesome. It's sound. Okay, we can go over to Titus. Paul talked about sound doctrine in Titus, I believe it's chapter 3, isn't it? For I give you good doctrine, forsake ye not the law. He says, for I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. He was tender in years. It means he was young. He was taught by the father while he was still in his youth and under the care of his mother. Isn't youth, when the child is young, isn't that the time to train up a child? Train up a child when they're young. You know, when the child gets to be 13, 14, 15 years old, and now we decide we want to train them up and we want to try to keep them from throwing tantrums and wallowing in the floor and kicking the doors off the hinges, hey, we might be a little late. You know, I have heard that so many times myself. You know, particularly you hear it when someone says, you can't force a child to go to church services. You'll make them hate the church. You know, well, here is always my answer to that. Listen, if you live at my house, this was the rule. If you live at my house, we go to church services on Sundays twice. If you live at my house on Wednesday, we're going to be at church services. And if you live at my house and we got a gospel meeting going on, we go to services. And if you come at me with that junk that says, oh, well, wait a minute, you're going to turn them away from wanting to go to the services. Well, you know what else I made them do? I made them brush their teeth. I made them take baths. I made them eat something besides candy. And they still brush their teeth. They still take baths. Now their eating habits could be a little better. I made them go to school. I made them wear clothes. And all of that stuff stuck. So that was the rule. Now, if they get grown and they want to go crazy and they want to do something goofy and like stop going to services, that has not got one thing to do with me making them do it when they were at my house. They chose to do that when they got grown, but that's on them. Got nothing to do with what I did. Because you know what? They're still brushing their teeth. They're still taking baths. They're still wearing clothes. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. You make them do what's right, and don't you let anyone tell you any different. And, you know, don't feel bad about it. Do not feel bad about it. And if you got a kid, and we've all got them, that does something we don't particularly care for, that's on them. You did what was right while they were at home. He taught me also, verse 4, and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words, keep my commandments, and live. Joshua 24:15. What did he say? As for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. Now, you do what you want to over here. That's fine. If you don't want to make your kid go to services, you're scared to death they're going to grow up and they're going to hate the church and they're not going to go to services. Well, what you're doing is you're training your child not to go to services, and when they grow up, they won't. Well, I'm going to train mine to go to services, and when they grow up, and when they don't, well, it ain't because I didn't train them not to, or that I didn't train them to not go, and that may happen, okay? But we're going to do it the right way at my house. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. We're talking about wisdom here. Listen, take instruction seriously. Don't decline it, verse 5. Okay? Don't forget it, because the evil days will come. So get understanding and don't forget it. Again, we go back to this idea. How do we become understanding? How do we gain understanding? We have to want it and we have to go get it. We have to do something. Wisdom, when we look in verse 7, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. And with all thy getting, get understanding. I don't know that we can put that any more clearly, can we? Wisdom and understanding doesn't just happen. So, what are we going to do with with wisdom? And what does wisdom do for us in return? Verse 8. Exalt wisdom, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honor when thou dost embrace her. Now, what kind of wisdom are we talking about here? Godly wisdom. We're not talking about worldly wisdom. She'll give you an ornament. The years and the years of thy life shall be many. We talked about that. Verse 11. I have taught thee in the way of wisdom. I have led thee in the right paths. Again, you have to be taught wisdom. Now, this isn't some kind of a direct operation of the Holy Spirit. It wasn't then during the miraculous. There were miracles happening during the Old Testament period. So in verse 11, you have to be taught wisdom. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. If you have wisdom, your steps are not going to be straightened in the sense, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, hindered. That's the word I'm looking for. Your steps are not going to be hindered, okay? And when you're running, you're not going to be stumbling. It's like you're not going to be stepping in a hole, okay? That's the whole idea here. When we get into verse 14 here, we have this other. This is another example. Of course, we have them throughout here of parallelism. Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of the evil men. It's the same thing. Okay, don't go into that path. In other words, along with verse 15 here, avoid evil at all cost. Avoid it. Pass not by it. Turn from it and pass away. Okay? It's like seeing nuclear waste on the side of the road. It's glowing green. You can't miss it. Stay away from it. And then we get to verse 16, and we have a wonderful example of people who are wicked and evil. Now, it's not a flattering example, right? These folks can't even sleep at night unless they've done some kind of evil. They can't get to sleep unless they've caused someone to fall. That's the kind of people we're talking about. But if you're wise, see, you'll avoid those people. They're constantly planning to do this. And this is Solomon talking to his children here. Stay away from these folks. Can you hear him pleading in his voice? Please stay away. You know, your children start getting big enough to go out and run around, and you know, at some point your children are going to be big enough to go out into the world, and you can't follow them everywhere they go. You have to train them to avoid this stuff. And this is what Solomon's doing. And you sit up, and you sit up, and you sit up until they come back home. And you're like, oh, they made it. You know, they made it. And it doesn't matter, you know, even if you got the best children, you're still, and they don't get old enough. They don't get old enough. It doesn't stop. Even when you start having grandchildren, your children don't get old enough, you still think, well, I hope they're behaving. You know, hope they're behaving. And you're just constantly, as wonderful as they are, it's a constant state of worry. And I read this and I feel so sorry for Solomon, and I want to think to myself, Solomon, why weren't you a better example? And then you think about yourself, why wasn't I a better example? I know I could have done it better. I wish I had it over, you know. And that's why he's pleading with his son. Oh, you got to be a better example. It's going to be your turn at some point. Please be a better example. Don't have this self-reproach. Don't do that. Verse 20, my son, attend to my words. Incline thy ear unto my... You hear him begging. Let them not depart from thine eyes. Keep thy heart with all diligence. Verse 23, out of, a book of Proverbs, this may be the greatest proverb in a book of great Proverbs. Verse 23. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Every good thing or every bad thing that happens, that we do in this world, where does it begin? It begins right in the heart. We can't emphasize that, brethren, enough. We have to keep, that means to protect, our hearts. Put away from thee a froward mouth and a perverse lip. Not just put it away from you, put it far away from you. Get it out of your life. Don't even look at it. Put your eyes on the right path. Put it on the right goal. Look straight before thee. Paul said, look toward the prize of the high calling. Pay attention to that. What's more important than that? Nothing. Nothing is more important than that. Ponder the path of thy feet. Let all thy ways be established. Go down the straight and narrow. Don't turn to the right hand or to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. That's the most important thing we can do. Stay on the straight and narrow. We look in chapter 5 here. Again, he's talking to his son. When we look in chapter 5, I think I'd have to look, make sure. What do your notes say in chapter 5? Do I have something there in the introduction? Is it 5 through 7 that talks about adultery? And only this section in chapter 6 that he kind of deviates from that. So, and I have that in those notes. So these are your handwritten notes here. So I won't go into that very much. But he's pleading with his son. So give your special attention to the Lord here. Bow your ear to understanding, that thou mayest regard discretion, and that thy lips may keep knowledge. Don't use deceit with your talk, okay? Your lips may keep knowledge. We must act discreetly, especially around the opposite sex. We have to learn that, okay? We have to speak properly. We have to be discreetly. And he's talking about, these chapters are geared toward adultery, okay? So that's kind of what he's talking about here. So let's be discreet. He begins to talk about this strange woman. Her lips are sweet. He used this example of a honeycomb. Her mouth is smoother than oil. So it sounds good, but what's the problem here? Well, she is. She's not yours, he's saying. She isn't yours. But not only is she isn't yours, she isn't God's. She's not your woman. She isn't God's woman. So she's some other man's woman. She belongs to another man. She's either another man's wife or she's a harlot. It looks like it tastes sweet like honeycomb, but it is bitter. It's like wormwood. That's the problem here. It's deceptive. Her feet go down to her death. Her steps take hold on Sheol. She'll get the body and the soul. She'll take care of everything. You're in trouble from the top to the bottom. She'll take you out of this world. She has different techniques. She varies her techniques. Okay? What's going to happen here? Hear me now, therefore, O you children, and depart not from my words of my mouth. You can depart from wisdom, and you can fall from grace. See, they can be wise for a while. We can gain wisdom, and we can be wise and smart and understand the right way, and then it just go out. Who's a greater example of that than Solomon? He was the wisest man who ever lived until Christ came into the world. And he went from being the wisest, a spiritual giant, to being the most unwise person. And then he finally came around, and we have the book of Ecclesiastes, but he had just spoiled his life. And he recognized that, right? Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh to the door of her house. Why? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You'll lose your honor, won't you? You're going to lose everything that's important. And thou mourn at last when thy flesh and thy body are consumed. She'll consume everything about you. What happens if you engage in activity like this? Now, you lose your soul, but what else could happen to you, physically speaking? You're out running around. Oh, you physically, I mean, no telling what you'll catch. Terrible things can happen to you. You know, and so, and eventually, verse 12, and say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to them that instructed me. I was almost in all evil in the midst of the congregation and assembly. You know, what happens when, everything's going good, you're enjoying these things, and then all of a sudden something terrible happens? And then you come back down to reality, life hits you in the face, and some terrible thing has happened, and then you're sitting around, you're saying, why didn't I listen? Why didn't I pay attention? I knew better than that. And we'll end on this. Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of water in the streets. Be faithful to your own wife. The water from that cistern over there, it's not any sweeter than the water from your own cistern and your own well. You need to straighten up and be wise. You know, when you allow problems in your home life, you tend to think, okay, well, maybe I do want water from a different well. Well, you need to straighten that problem up and come to your realization that maybe I've caused the problem. Stay married. Don't violate your vows. Particularly, for this stranger here, your wife is supposed to be a loving hind and a pleasant roe. And let her satisfy your marital bed, Malachi 2:14. And be faithful. And we see that on down through the end of the chapter. Sin binds you, what we learn in 22 and 23. And the longer you stay bound by sin, the harder it is to become unbound by sin. That is the problem with sin. All right. Thanks so much. We'll pick up chapter 6 and 7 next time. We're behind a couple chapters here. We'll make it up. All right. Thanks so much.